Welcome back to Vivid Noise, and this time we're looking at Sonic Riders, and more specifically, I want to talk about why this right here is one of the best single-player, non-conventional racing game experiences. What do I mean by non-conventional? Well, it doesn't have real cars in it, right? When it comes to racing games, there's kart racers, quote-unquote, and you got regular, just, conventional racing games. So, like Gran Turismo, Need for Speed, Burnout, even, no matter how arcade and how sim, it's all in the same boat when you're using actual cars or ones that resemble cars, even if they're not licensed. But this kind of game right here, a mascot racer, there you go, that's a much better term for it. This is one of my favorite mascot racers probably ever, especially when it comes to the single-player experience. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before I get into all that, let's just talk about the game on its own. What do I think of Sonic Riders as just a game first, and then a single-player racing experience second? Well, have you seen it? Look at this fucking game. It's, one, absolutely incredible in terms of its art direction and its sound design. It is such... and it feels like an anthem. Like, everything about this game proclaims just this incredible energy, this youth, this vibrance, right? That, as I described in another one of my videos, I don't remember which one, but I remember I mentioned that when I play this game, it's like the world glows, like everything just becomes brighter. And yeah, I totally feel that way. Just looking at the footage right now while I'm recording this, it's like it's not even nighttime right now. I record these at night typically, but this is just, it's an emotion, right? The music, it's such a unique take on Sonic music. Drum and bass is actually quite common in current Sonic music, but this is a very different kind of drum and bass. It's a much softer, much airier take on the genre, and it's just gorgeous to listen to. The compositions are usually quite repetitive, but everything just works really well. It never gets fatiguing, right? Which is especially helpful considering that the game itself can be frustrating when you're new. It has a very steep learning curve, which I will get into. But once you get the hang of things, it is an experience just that you cannot... But once you get into it, it's an experience that I cannot compare to anything else. And yeah, okay, I'm a bit biased because it's Sonic, but really, I mean, you could fucking put Crash on this and I'd still love it. You could put Mario on this. I don't care. This is a really fun game that is presented really well. Let's talk about that a little more. Despite the the initial difficulty, I would say, not overall, it becomes way easier. It becomes second nature over time, but despite the fact that at first it might be a little overwhelming, this game is very simple mechanically. All you have is just your acceleration, which is automatic, steering, drifting, and the boost button, which also doubles as an attack. And as you can see right here with Tails, you've also got these secondary abilities depending on the character type. I find that when it comes to what makes this game a little more difficult to approach compared to other mascot racers, it would have to be the air meter. And honestly, I don't find it to be too much of a, I don't know if you call it a handicap. I wouldn't mind, don't get me wrong, if they had removed the air meter right before the game released, really it wouldn't have changed much, because when you get good at this game, the air meter becomes a non-issue. I think you will actually see me run out of air during a couple races, but even then, I think I still win well, of course I still win, I wouldn't feature it in the video otherwise, so clearly it's not the end of the world when that happens. It's just a bit of a penalty for, I guess, not paying attention. It's a punishing game, it definitely is. It's not as approachable as something like Mario Kart or even Sonic All-Stars. But with that challenge comes a reward. This game is extremely rewarding to learn how to play well. Adding to this is the lack of power-ups, really. This game only has passive pickups. It's got rings, some extra air, and like these speed shoe icons, some of which I think slow you down and others speed you up a little bit. They are small potatoes. They do not add anything when it comes to the overall dynamic of the race. You are not going to get blue shelled or even red shelled or any kind of shelled or rocketed if you're talking Sonic All-Stars. It's really all up to you. The AI doesn't rubber band too much, I don't think. I mean, judging by how much of a lead I have right now in this race, clearly it can't be rubber banding that much. As I mentioned earlier, the characters are split into different classes, and this adds a tiny little bit of depth, but really what it truly adds is just replay value. You can play a track with a different character and that changes the route that you're going to take. I mean, I'm not talking like massive alternate pathways or shortcuts, but just tiny little differences in the way that you play. I think there are some balancing issues here. Generally, the power types are better because they can completely disregard most environmental hazards. You're going to see me do that right here with Knuckles. But it's just something that adds a tiny little bit more character to these characters. They're not just reskins, or at least not reskins of each other. I guess you could make the argument that Knuckles is a reskin of Storm, who would be a reskin of, I think Eggman's a power type. But still, it is nice to have those extra classes. And they're not total game changers, because personally I've never been a fan of when games of really any type, so like a fighting game or a racing game or whatever it might be, will have different characters that have totally different play styles, because it just makes it a little bit more cumbersome to try and learn them all, especially if the game forces you to use them. That can add more variety to the overall competitive nature of the game. It's just not my thing. If I had to give you guys some, I guess, tips on how to play this game better, if you really want to get into it, there's only a few simple things you have to remember. One, get really good at tricks, because they are your main method of getting air. No, not just literally, you get air in your gauge. You can technically get air from the pickups that you get, like the item capsules, but they're not reliable enough. Really, you got to make sure you can get it through tricks, because you're constantly going off ramps. Take advantage of that. Also, don't abuse the boost, but don't forget that it can do damage to your opponents, and it gives you a little bit of air back. And it's one of my top strategies when I'm starting a race. I'll just boost into the closest opponent, and it gives me a little bit of air back while also speeding me up. And finally, if you're playing as the speed or flight class or type, whatever, don't get too complacent when it comes to the alternate pathways. Don't always try and go for them, because they can be very risky, and falling off the stage resets your air meter back to the base level. So sometimes if you don't feel fully confident that you can nail that grind rail or hit those hoops just right, maybe just stick to the default path. It'll probably be faster. Now, why do I think this is a better single-player kart racing / mascot racer experience than almost any other game of its type out there? Well, I think it boils down to 3 points: accessibility, overall design, and the single-player layout of the game. The first one is pretty self-explanatory. This game is just not as user or beginner-friendly specifically as something like Mario Kart or Sonic All-Stars. It simply isn't. The simple addition of the air meter on its own makes this game more punishing than your typical game of this kind, because you've essentially got like a constantly ticking fuel meter in a way. I mean, that's literally what it is. And that makes it so your mistakes get punished a lot more, and you're constantly fighting the clock in a certain way. And something that every single multiplayer-focused game needs to get right is that approachability. So if you call your friends over to play Sonic Riders, it's not going to happen. You're going to be playing Sonic Riders. They're going to be playing, how do I play this game? Sonic Riders simply does not have that pick up and play factor that even its own sequel, Riders Zero Gravity, kind of was able to achieve, right? It's still not as pick up and play as Mario Kart, but is far more forgiving, far more accessible. But when you're playing Mario Kart, just any of them, when I say Mario Kart, it's just a blanket statement, just for whatever system you have, or Sonic All-Stars, Racing, Transform, Team Sonic Racing, whatever it might be. When you're playing those games, you don't have that learning period at all. You just pick up the controller and you instantly understand what's happening, because it's so simple and so intuitive, and all your friends can instantly get into it. Although I believe that since Mario Kart already exists to fill that niche, not to mention Sonic All-Stars fills that niche for people who are specifically into Sonic, there is still tons of value in the way that Sonic Riders, specifically the first entry in the series, handles its gameplay. There's just so much satisfaction you can get out of nailing it. I'm not going to say it has a ton of depth. Again, as I said, the mechanics are extremely simple. They just take a little more time to get used to, but when you do, it's just a total rush. You're flying. It is a completely different sensation compared to playing a Mario Kart style game well. That's fun too, but it's a more methodical kind of fun. It's kind of like going from Sonic Adventure 1 to Sonic Unleashed daytime levels. You get what I mean? They're both enjoyable, just one takes a little more practice, but when you get really good at it, you're flying through the levels, and it's incredible. As a result of all of these things working in this way, Sonic Riders is just a solitary experience. I believe this game was really meant to be played on your own. It does have multiplayer content, because of course it does, but it's so much more rewarding when you're just playing it on your own, getting good at it, beating the AI. And it's not even just the AI. You can take the AI out, and just the movement, the way the characters flow through the levels is incredibly satisfying on its own. It's that intrinsic sort of reward from just being good at maneuvering these boards. My second point as to why I think this game is much better as a single player experience compared to its contemporaries and even games coming out now, it's the inherent design, the way the game plays when it comes to the track designs and items. It's really the items. That's the main thing I want to talk about. It's the items, or I guess lack thereof. Really, the items in this game are totally minimal. Pretty much nothing happens when you pick them up. You just get your rings, which increase your air meter. You get some extra air on its own. That's its own pickup. There's also a ball and chain that kind of slows you down, but there's no items in this game that you can use against your opponents. I think Zero Gravity added like one or two. No, I think all Zero Gravity added was the colored splooge, like that thing that flops up on your screen and it makes it hard to see, or at least it's supposed to make it hard to see. But most of these kind of games, those kind of items don't actually do that. They just put an overlay that you can see right through. Like the rainbow in Sonic All-Stars Racing, the original. It really, you can still see just fine through it. Like, you know what's more confusing? The one that flips the whole level upside down. Unless that was, or was that Sonic All-Stars Transformed? Oh my god, I'm not autistic enough to remember these things. But you get the idea. The items are very much just, they're passive, right? They don't do much. And that really separates it from a Mario Kart style game where you have these pickups which you have to actively use against your opponents to screw them over and give yourself an advantage. When those items are basically non-existent, it's all about you. It's all about just being, in control of what's happening and being able to maneuver around the tracks as well as possible. And that's something that has a lot more in common with your traditional regular car style racing game. So, like a Race Driver Grid, like a Assetto Corsa, I guess. No matter what kind, be it arcade, simcade, total simulation. I talked about this in my Colin McRae Rally Free video. That's just something that this game has in common with those kind of games. And lastly, I gotta talk about the actual structure of the game when it comes to the single-player campaign, because, well, for one, there's an actual plot with cutscenes, and weirdly enough, some of the best character animation in Sonic history outside of like TV shows. Like, seriously, it's scarily good. The squash and stretch is just insane here. But other than that, it's got this very Sonic Adventure 2 battle style structure to it, where you've got your hero campaign, I guess, Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and you got the Babylon campaign, where you have a Jet, Wave, and Storm. Simply the fact that this game has like any sort of story at all, and like lore behind it, things happening that gets expanded upon in the sequel and then not really looked at too much in Sonic's Free Riders. But I mean, come on, did that game really happen? Let's just all pretend that game never happened, okay? But still, just the fact that it has these features means that the developers were probably aware of the fact that this game probably wasn't gonna be a hit with the crowds, if that makes sense. I mean, it did okay review-wise. I mean, definitely did a lot better than Sonic 06. I can't believe this game came out the same year as 06, considering how much more polished it is, although it was made by a totally separate team. Yeah, it says Sonic Team, but if you look up the credits, no one was involved, like none of the same people, right? It was a totally different team within Sonic Team. And so naturally it came out really well, especially since they were working with hardware that at that point was far better explored. Like everyone knew the PS2, Xbox, and GameCube inside and out at that point, whereas Sonic 06, that was being made for the 360 and PS3, which were, not quite as well documented. Sonic Riders also has a conventional Grand Prix sort of mode, but there's almost no point in playing it unless it unlocks things. I'm not Look, I may be a bit of a Sonic nerd, but I'm also not super familiar with all like the, you know, tiny little, oh, this thing unlocks this, like the unlock relationships between certain events in the game. Like, I have no idea. I haven't even done the mission mode. Yeah, this game has a mission mode. Nice segue. I haven't even done a single mission, but just the fact that it's there, you know, that's got to mean something, right? They probably knew, hey, people are probably going to want to, you know, people on their own are going to want to have something to do. Because, as I was saying earlier, before I kind of got sidetracked a little bit, this game, I'm sure that they predicted that it would not have been as popular among, I don't want to say casual gamers, that sounds kind of, it's a little bit shallow to say that, but what I mean is they knew this wasn't going to be a party piece. This was not going to be a substitute for Mario Kart. No, that's what Mario Kart is for, and then later Sonic All-Stars. But they had a feeling, I'm sure, that this was just going to be a more single-player style thing, so they added more content to support that. I haven't even touched that content, but hey, the fact that it's there, you know, it's got to mean something, and I appreciate the fact that they've included it. Maybe I'll try and do the missions. I probably won't, though. I mean, I'm just satisfied enough playing the Grand Prix over and over again. They're so fun. The tracks are ridiculously well designed. They can be frustrating, as you can see. I just fell off the track right there. It can be difficult. This game is not without some issues in terms of the control. It can be a little bit unpredictable when it comes to how the drifting works. But when it flows, when you get it just right, it is really fun. But don't be surprised if you have to use save states, for example. I will fully admit to doing that my first couple of tries playing this game until I really got the hang of how it plays. Fortunately, we have that luxury now. People, you know, didn't back then, but I mean, there's always the restart button. The game is not very punishing at all when it comes to its restarts, unlike most games, racing games where you have like Grand Prix and stuff, which may or may not let you restart an individual race. Here, you can totally just restart, especially in the story mode, right? And the races are pretty short. I mean, I did like 6 races, I think, for this video, and it's only a 20-minute video, right? Having said that, we're getting pretty close to the end, so I should probably just wrap up. So what do I think? Like, why did I say all of these things? Why do I think Sonic Riders is a better single-player experience? Is that putting any other like mascot racers of this kind below it? Not at all. I still think that, you know, Mario Kart Double Dash, for, you know, that would have been the relevant Mario Kart game at the time. Mario Kart Double Dash is a really, really great kart racer. Maybe Crash Nitro Kart not so much, you know. Go stick to Crash Team Racing, right? Or I guess nowadays Nitro Fueled. Come to think of it, Sonic Riders' more solo-focused design is probably why it's appealed to me so much. Not just the aesthetics and just the pure, unadulterated vibe of it all. It's such a vibe-ass game, man. But it's also because I've always been drawn to more solitary-type racing games, ones that don't rely too much on online or split-screen. Again, as I said, the more conventional style of racing games. And I feel like Sonic Riders has a little more in common with those kind of racing games compared to a kart racer. It still is a kart racer ultimately, or a mascot racer, but it's just a little different, and I really, really like it. Thanks for watching this episode of Vivid Noise. It was a little more argumentative this time around, but still, I hope you saw what I was trying to get at, and yeah, I'll see you at the next one.